Well, Margaret and Amy, thank you for joining me today on the Minimalist Moms podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you both here today. I love your show. It's so much fun, and I know other women love it as well, so they can't wait to hear from you on my show today. Why don't we get into some background about the two of you, and then we'll get into our conversation. Why don't you do some introductions? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll start. So my background is in comedy. I was a improvisational comic back in the day, and then moved to Hollywood to be a television writer, and lived in a van for a while doing comedy shows around the country, and kind of was a traveling comic for hire. As a farther on into my career, I worked for Nickelodeon for a while, and then what was it, AIM? 10 years ago, I hooked up with Amy Wilson.
Yeah.
And I was working at Nickelodeon, working on a project, and a video came across my desk. And Amy had been a college comedy group member with my sister. And I knew that she'd written a parenting book. I'd obviously seen her. She's going to tell you about her illustrious career, but I'd seen her on TV. And I said, that's Amy Wilson, who went to college with my sister. And I reached out to my sister and I said, I just saw Amy Wilson in something. Do you have her number? I want to pitch her an idea. And I called her, I emailed her, and I said, do you want to have a drink? I want to talk to you about something. Met up for a drink. I said, what do you think about doing a podcast? We're both kind of in comedy and in the mom space. And there's this new thing, podcasting, and I think we should try it. And the rest is what fresh history.
That's right. That's it. Yeah. So I was always an actor who wrote my own material. I mean, I did improv too. I did sketch comedy. I did one-woman shows. I ended up getting a book deal. I did a show that called Motherload that ran in New York for a while, and then it ran around the country, and then I got a book deal out of that. And before that, I was an actor who had been on, I did a Broadway play, off-Broadway. I was on a couple of sitcoms. And, then the kids were born. And so every time there was a turn in my path and the acting wasn't going as well as I used to, I wrote my own material. I got out of college and nobody wanted to hire me. I wrote my own material. And so creating my own thing, even before blogs and podcasts and the sort of creator content that we all consume so much of now, I was sort of an early adopter of whatever was available. At the time, it was like basements on the Lower East Side. Come watch my weird show. That's where I started.
Watch my one-woman show,
right?
About
my one-woman
feet
show.
Or whatever.
I did lots of one-woman shows, and I guess you just put them on Instagram now.
We got costumes in the barn. We're gonna put on a show.
Yeah, but I am also a dork who loves to do research, and so this podcast over the last 8 years. I mean, we just tried it because we enjoyed each other's company and thought we'd try it. It's turned into quite something else along the way. But the part that I really love about it, well, there's lots of parts I love about it, but the one I was going to say was that I really do love getting to read a book that sounds interesting and then ask the author anything I want to ask them. That's such a
I thought you were going to say it was me, Amy, the part you really loved about it. So now I'm just sitting here.
The gift, the privilege,
the gift that is me.
Thank you. With Margaret.
Yeah, no, you guys have a great dynamic. I really do enjoy listening, so I'll be sure to link the show in the show notes. What's with the title? Where'd you guys come up with the title?
So What Fresh Hell is a Dorothy Parker quote, the famous female wit of the Algonquin Round Table. And also was my mother would describe her own mothering experience as just opening doors and thinking, what fresh hell awaits me behind it? Because she had 4 kids. My mom had been a very professional working woman in the 50s and 60s, and then got married in her 30s, and constantly says, people were like, oh, she's a spinster. Too bad she didn't want to have kids. And she got married when she was like 33. I mean, she wasn't, quite as old as you would think. And so she was incredible and wonderful, but somewhat reluctant mother. And I think she approached the entire experience with a certain gimlet eye and and so that was sort of her catchphrase. And so I think, is that right, Amy, that I said we should call it What Fresh Hell? I think I already had that in mind.
I'd like to do a podcast with you, and I think it should be called What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood.
Yeah,
we
because
do tend
there's
to agree
just
on most
something
things
about it.
But
it's kind of our point of view. Like, it's not like what rainbow wonderland awaits? It's like, this is going to kind of stink, but we're going to get
This'll
through
hurt.
it by laughing a lot.
Yeah, yes. No, I love it. It's very realistic and authentic. I'm curious to know with the dynamic of the two of you, because today I wanted to talk about intentionality with being partners in this business, because I think that's something that a lot of us get ourselves into. And then once it's once it's played out, maybe it doesn't go like we want it to. There are challenges and a lot of us give up. So I just wanted to encourage any woman that might be going into business with a friend or a partner with your guys' stories, and also just kind of a personal narrative of you guys, because I think this is really interesting and I think you two are interesting. So you guys started this podcast 8 years ago. I want to know what it's been like being in business with a friend and maybe some of the challenges that you've encountered.
Well, it's interesting because people always assume that we were like next door neighbors and best friends or like sisters or all those things before we started the podcast.
Uh-huh.
We were acquaintances and sort of a mutually respectful relationship. Like, oh, she's funny, oh, she's good, she's smart, whatever. And I'll try this thing with her. But when we started to record our podcast, we didn't even know. I knew Margaret had 3 kids. I didn't know how old they were, or boys or girls. And for definitely at least the first 100 episodes, we'd have a topic. It was like homework. Like, should we make our kids do it if they don't want to or not? And
Mm-hmm.
we'd sort of come prepared without, revealing what we were going to say to the other person. And I honestly had no idea what Margaret was going to say. These days, I feel like I usually do, but you still surprise me sometimes.
I always say it was like a blind date that led to a really successful marriage, because truly it came about because I was at this job that I knew was winding up, and I kept thinking, and I had had so many restarts in my career as, okay, now I'm going to be a Hollywood writer. Okay. For 800 different reasons, I was ready to get out of that. I got married, I had kids, I wanted to move back to New York. And it was always, what's next? What's next? And I just had this feeling of like, here we go again. Like, what's next?
Mm-hmm.
And saw Amy at my job very coincidentally and said, hey, do you want to try this? I knew she was a, what do you call it? Like a rise and grinder. I knew she was a worker.
Oh,
I
yeah.
knew she would come in. I knew she was somebody really smart, and I knew she was a workhorse. That's kind of the only things that were on my radar about her. And I
Uh-huh.
knew we were in the same business. And in fact, at the beginning, I wasn't even sure we were going to do parenting. We kind of went back and forth a little bit.
Right.
But basically, it has turned out that this was just kismet. We have an incredibly complementary set of skills. I mean, almost you couldn't design us in a lab to have better complementary skills. Amy calls me idea cannon. I'm kind of like, you know what we could do? You know what we could do? And Amy is practical, smart, and I think also in a way that I'm not confident in her own abilities, in terms of, I kind of sometimes get a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, but I'm a comic, I'm not supposed to know how to read a spreadsheet. And Amy is just kind of relentlessly able, in terms of, I can figure this out, and able to, now we have a business with 5 employees, and
Wow.
it's 2 LLCs. And so we have adapted. We started with just our podcast, and now we have a podcast network, which is called Atlas Media. And we have 22 women focused podcasts under our banner. And so we now run quite an elaborate enterprise. And I think for me, the blockade to that was, how would I know what I'm doing? I used to live in a van and do comedy. Like, I don't belong talking to an accountant. And I feel like Amy always had a really strong sense of confidence in those spaces, and I think is actually really particularly good at figuring things out in a way that I'm not.
Well, thanks. But the truth is, there wouldn't be Atlas Media, right? If you weren't like, what if we just did this? Like, Margaret is always the one who thinks bigger, who sees around corners, and yeah. And when we talked about starting this company, it wasn't that I didn't want to do it, but I was like, oh, sounds hard. Sounds like we might have to do this. And then we just kept coming back, and we're just very deliberate about, well, what would it take and what would it look like? And I was doing a lot of stuff for the podcast. Now that we have 5 employees, we don't do that much for What Fresh Hell besides prepare and record the episodes, which, as you know, Diane, is still a lot of work. But all the pre-production and post-production, we have somebody who does that. And we have an editor, and so I was doing a lot of that and even selling the ads. I used to do a lot of the ad sales and stuff for Wet Fresh Health. And so I thought, how can I have a company? But of course, once you have a company, then that means you have people who do those things so you can run the company. And so it took me a while to realize that growth is how you refind time instead of have even less time.
I'm curious to know if you both think that yin and yang has been a contributor to the success, because I don't know. I think that's my hesitation. I do this all by myself. I don't have anyone working for me. And I have been so afraid, talking about hindering growth. I have been so afraid to bring someone else on because I'm like, wonder if it doesn't go well, wonder if I've invested this money and then I'm out that money and then this is what I'm using in our family budget and then I've made a poor choice. So I've had this hesitation, but I think I've stifled my growth in that way to where I could focus on creativity and I don't know, just other things, I guess. But I do think I need to find that complementary person to help me. And I'm wondering if you think that has been a huge now, or maybe in the past versus now.
I tend to always work in partnerships to the point where I had to have a whole personal reckoning of like, do I not trust myself? And like, I was more worried. I had a comedy partner for a long time and then I had a writing partner when I was in LA. And I like a partnership, but I think you have to know what works for yourself. And I know that I am very big on ideas, but I'm not amazing at follow-up and delivery and deadlines. And I tend to be disorganized and I like to have somebody to bounce ideas off of. I just think that is the ground that I thrive in, is just a partnership. And I know for myself, when I try to work alone, I get a little bit like, that could wait till tomorrow. I don't get as much done. And so I definitely think it's really worth thinking about, is the way that I'm currently working making sense? And I do think, and Amy touched on this before, and none of this was designed. So we're kind of looking back and putting together what made it work and maybe defining towards that to some degree. But I do think that the fact that Amy and I were not super close when we started our partnership was huge, because some of the partnerships that I've had before, I think have been a little bit like, what's really going on? And is the personal getting in the way of the professional? And is the professional hurting our personal? And Amy and I now, I mean, she's my work wife. She's like my other half in so many ways, but we don't still have a hugely overlapping personal life. I mean, I didn't know her husband's name when we started the podcast. We didn't know much about each other. And I think that little bit of distance, but I like, as you're talking about the idea of intentionality, I think one thing that we have done well is step back. And one other thing is, I think we're a little bit older, and I think our age has been really helpful in terms of, I think as a younger woman, I spent a lot of time like, I can do it all myself, and I've got this. I'm a rise and grinder, and I can take everything on. And I just think we're at a stage of life where every decision has to be really practical. I have this many hours in a day. I've got 3 kids who I'm very involved with. They've got things. I've got deadlines. I've got family. I've got aging parents. Whatever it is, we are in a stage of forced intentionality. And I also think I'm at a phase where I think one of the reasons our business really started is because we were running our own ads for What Fresh Hell. Basically, we were doing our own advertising.
Yeah.
And we had a bunch of, I'm going to say, youngish males who approached us and said, we can take this over for you and do a great job. And literally, we kept running numbers that they were presenting us and realizing, wait, we're making more than that ourselves. So why would we? And I think as a younger person, I would have seen those offers as like, oh, this is the raft I've been swimming
Somebody
to.
wants me. Yeah.
And at this phase, I had this feeling of, I actually know more. I mean, we would truly be in meetings with folks who were saying to us, I've been looking at this podcasting thing for a month now, and I think I can really change the way you're doing business. And I would think, I mean, God bless you. The confidence on you, my dude. I love it. That I've been doing this for 6 years and you're coming to me with this. Like I read about this on Google and I think I can do it better than you. And so there's a lot of factors that come together in making it work.
It sounds like a pretty, not straightforward, but easy ride. I don't know how else to phrase it. Have there been road bumps?
We have a rule that Margaret's brother is a lawyer.
Yes.
Okay.
And he told us, we were like, oh, guess we need like an LLC with formal agreements and that kind of thing. That's probably 5 years behind us.
Yeah.
And then you have to get into things of like, what happens when one of us doesn't want to do the show anymore? What happens when there's a disagreement? What happens? You have to really formalize all these things. And he gave us this very good advice that in a disagreement, no wins. Like, should we start a movie development wing of Catalyst Media? I really want to. Margaret says no, then the answer is no. Should we bring this show on? Should we, open an LA office? Whatever the questions might be, that both people have to agree or it doesn't happen. And that has been putting that rule in place and just knowing that that's the rule. I feel like that has been so helpful because then you don't have to keep talking about it until you change the no into a yes. It's no and no is the answer.
Or when we kind of moved from What Fresh Hell to AdList and did bump out the network, I think our original conversations, Amy, you were not as sure that was the right next step. And listen, Amy's writing a book. Like, we have a lot of stuff going on. So it wasn't necessarily the right next step. It's like, well, can I write a book and do this? I don't know. I mean, it would not unreasonable conversations. But then it was kind of like, it's a month later. I'm still thinking about this. And so it's not a no takes it and
we never speak
the end
again.
of it.
That's right.
But it lets us start from a point of view of, listen, if you really think that this is the right thing, you have to convince the other person. You have to show research. You have to run numbers. And I think that has really defined our partnership. And it does go back to intentionality. Like, because sometimes I am like, we should start a realty company. I don't know. I get 3 a.m. ideas. And some of my ideas are not good. And it's been a really nice practice of, is this idea, have we really like tested the joists on this concept? Because if not, Amy's not going to say yes. And that's the end of the road. We know that that's the ruling definition of our partnership.
Or sometimes they are good ideas. I'm thinking of an example, like we were making comedy video content during the pandemic that was really, getting somewhere. People liked it. It was good. It wasn't that it was good and it was funny. It was that we weren't monetizing it successfully compared to our podcast episodes. And the horizon of making that something that was profitable was pretty far away. And so being intentional about like, okay, if our goal is profitability, then we need to spend more time making podcast episodes, which we can sell ads against, than videos, which we can't, at least right now. And I think then maybe that turned into like, well, then let's start a company and sell ads for other. If profitability is this, we know how to do something that other people don't. Let's lean into that. Yeah. You can do something well and still not have it be the exact right answer. If once you know what your goal is, right? If our goal is like to have fun, then make more videos.
Yeah. Well, I think it is a hard thing when you are working by yourself. It is hard to know what the next step is to grow because you do second guess yourself sometimes. So sometimes I think you do just have to take a leap of faith and be okay with failing and say, this wasn't great, but I took knowledge away from this experience. It wasn't a failure because I learned something and I know how to now pivot and do something different. And maybe don't put all your eggs in one basket of growth. But how have you been? So you had the podcast. What are other ways you've been intentional about growing What Fresh Hell?
Well, we started What Fresh Hell with the intention of, this will be our what's next. We never had a conversation of, let's do this to make money. We were still, honestly, I thought my future was going to be in comedy writing. And I think Amy was still doing acting work. And honestly, we started the podcast with the intention of like raising our industry profiles, I think, is what we both went into it with the idea of.
Okay.
And because we didn't understand the model at all. We didn't understand the potential because there was no such thing as podcasting. So we started with a very different intention. And then as we started doing it, we started thinking, oh, people. And so while we're still have this secondary goal of raising our profile and we're going to get a book deal, I mean, I think we really thought this was going to lead to our next thing for both of us, whether together or separately. Probably at the time, separately, we thought. Then we started figuring out, oh, wait, the next step is actually selling ads. And then we started doing that. And then the next step is selling more ads. And then we started selling out What Fresh Hell. And then the next step is starting a company and selling ads for other people. But within What Fresh Hell, once we started selling ads, it became clear that the more people who listen, the more money you make off of advertising revenue. And so it was very organic, the kind of growth, because it became, okay, now, and we have done speaking at conferences. There's a million ways to grow a podcast that are pretty, Googleable. You trade, you go on other people's podcasts, as we're doing now. You do appearances. We started doing live shows. And so I think that Amy is exactly right, that knowing your goal sets your intentions. And that's kind of the model that we've followed in this business. And that our goal originally was, okay, I want to write a book, I guess, because I had a blog and I guess I should write a book. And maybe if I had a podcast, people would pay me to write a book. And so, and then a year in, suddenly we're making actual money doing podcast advertising. Wait a minute, our goal is not secondary. Our goal is primary. Let's make a living making this podcast by successfully selling advertising. To do that, we need more listeners. Okay, let's get very intentional. I'll tell you, as everyone knows, podcast discovery is a hard business. Getting people to listen to your podcast, if someone comes on and tells you how to do that, please give them my number next, because it's not the easiest nut to crack. But I think our intention, like, we're very clear always on where we're sailing towards.
Do you have anything to add, Amy?
I mean, the only thing I would say is I remember several years ago, a good friend of mine saying to me, like, so what's the end? Like, what's the point of the podcast? Like, why are you doing it? What's the point? Like, the point is to do it. And of course, nobody would ask me that now. But at the time, it was just starting to make a little bit of money. And it went from like, I'm doing it because I like it. What do you mean? To having bigger dreams and plans. And I think we're in business together.
And I think that's right. I think when you come from where both of us came from, which is the entertainment side of things, you do just to be doing it. I mean, I remember at some point I was doing Steve Harvey's daytime show as his like parenting expert, and they weren't paying me. They were flying me out to Chicago from LA. It was like costing me money to do it by the time I got babysitters for my kids. And I said to my husband, what am I doing this for? And he said, because people care about people who are on TV. I go, that's what I did everything for, because trying to make people care about me was my only intention in that time. And it is nice to have an intention that's a little bit more practical right now in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are giving me things to think about. My goal with this podcast was simply just because it sounded fun. And then it became something bigger than I ever expected it to be. And then again, I think because you had this creative art almost that you were creating, again, giving over the reins of control, even in the slightest bit, to someone feels like you're not creating your own art anymore. Like, that's how it has felt to me. But again, you guys were talking about just knowing, maybe having some business experience from what you guys had been doing previously. You saw like, oh no, we don't want to stunt our growth. This is the next step. And so I think that's where I'm headed. And you both have inspired me to start thinking a little bit more about, because I don't want to stifle, and I don't want people to feel stifled either if they have a creative project. Like, that's where I think you take the leap of faith. Like, just start and then see where it goes.
And I do think, and this is something I talk about with the young women who babysit my children and the young women and older women who we work with at our company every day, including the young women we employ and the women who come in as podcasters. We have to kind of throw off the idea that making money for ourselves is unseemly in some way, and that it's not a valuable goal. And I think that a lot of women have been conditioned, and I know I was, to feel like, well, I'm really about my art and my creativity, and I don't care about money. Money is somehow beneath me, or money is, it's nice if it comes, but I don't need it. And one thing that I have learned in my years is, and I am now hopefully not mercenary, but quite vocal on the fact that you deserve to be paid for your work. Money is the arbiter. I mean, I waited tables for a lot of years, and people were like, how can I ever thank you when I was a good waitress? And I would think, there's only one way, and it's to leave more money on the table. That's how you can thank me. And I think that idea And I would never have said that as a waitress, like, oh,
Yeah.
money. I'm not about
Right.
money. I just love the joy of serving you food.
Mhm.
No, I'm here because it's a business and I'm here to make money and I deserve to be paid for the good work that I do. And I
Mhm.
have figured out a formula to be paid for that work. And I'm not going to be shy about pursuing monetary compensation for hard work. And I think
Mhm.
that alone took me 30 years to figure out.
Mm.
There's a middle lane that I think all three of us are in, and probably a lot of people listening too. That right? It's like we don't work in law firms, and we've stayed home with our kids and raised them, and then we also do this other thing, and it's about taking that as seriously as you would take
That's a good point.
a job that isn't an office. I mean, we could get an
Mhm.
office if we wanted to, but that your Etsy store isn't anything you have to apologize for,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And
Mhm.
in fact is something that you should treat as a job,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
it
like
is
you
a
wouldn't
job,
go to a
right.
law firm and file their papers as a favor.
Right.
And so you should be doing your Etsy store. And listen, it may take you 5 years to make
Mhm.
$100. It may take you a long time to make a profit, but it is, I think setting the intention around money is a huge blockade for a lot of women. And it's something that I try to give voice to as often as I can because,
Mhm.
I mean, if you want to like reject capitalism as a form and live a different life, I'm not talking to you. But if you are trying to pursue a business, really, I might argue the most important part of a business is making money.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Someone said once, but I had heard once that you think it's worthwhile to put out there, then you absolutely should be paid for it. Because if you're like, oh, this is just kind of crap, I was putting out crap, and you saying that this is valuable, like taking ownership and saying this is valuable, and I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't.
And I think that the blockade for a lot of women especially, and maybe I'm being gendered and maybe it's a lot of people in general, and I would be open to that idea, is I am worth something. I am
Mhm.
worthwhile. What we're doing is like putting our voices on a microphone and saying, I deserve to be paid for
Mhm.
my voice just talking about things.
Yeah.
And I think it is a block for people in lots of different arenas. And when I have a babysitter who comes in, any poor babysitter who comes into my house and says, I don't really know what I charge. Can you just tell me what you think I'm worth? I'm like, have a seat, Lorraine. We're going to have a chat. Okay. This is how it's going to look. You're going to set a
Mhm.
price with me right now. You're going to hold to it. People who try to pay you less, you're not going to babysit their kids.
Mhm.
Because I do think that the like, whatever you think is fine. I understand why a 16-year-old young woman feels that way, but I do try to push back on like, let's learn this lesson earlier than I did. You're here
Yeah.
because you're good at taking care of my kids. That's
Mhm.
valuable work. You should state how much that is, what you're going to charge for it, and you should be consistent about it.
Mhm. Oh, that is a great lesson to learn for sure. What about
I'm
just
still learning
starting?
it.
Yeah. What about any word of advice to someone that is just starting off? Again, maybe wants to start a podcast or start a business in that kind of like where you pay your dues. Because when I did this podcast, I made no money on it the first 2 or 3 years. That started again, maybe it was once I got more intentional about getting listeners, but I feel like I did it for free. I showed up as a creative project before it started. I saw the benefit. So, what is your word of encouragement there?
I think my husband is an investor and
Mm.
invests in software companies that are,
Okay.
large, like many multiples of this. And before that, he was an investor in other sorts of things.
Mhm.
So it's funny. So he's my touchstone for real world creative projects. I mean, it's still software. It's still not something you can hold in your hand, but it's not
Mhm.
like I have an idea for a podcast or like I think I should sell these clothes I make on an Etsy store. Those feel, as we were talking about, those feel more apologetic and not real. And it's
Mhm.
surprising to me sometimes when I run by him, like he would say that of course a business doesn't make money for the first 2 years. Maybe they have venture capital, maybe they're mortgaging their house, but everybody has a couple of lean years, including Netflix, whatever, including Five Guys. Like everybody starts small and rolls the dice and bets big and builds intentionally. Your business isn't a bad idea because you're not making money in the first 3 months that it exists.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think it's definitely something that people have said before, it's not original to me, but no one will take you more seriously than you're willing to take yourself. So going out there and saying like, I don't really belong here. I just have a little podcast, or I just want to start a flower shop and I'm kind of a dummy. Like, people are not, and I'm saying this because this was my voice for years. Like, I'm just a comic who lives in a van. Like, I don't really belong at a, and I will say, I think that Amy was like a great life raft for me in that way of like, no, we can do this. We can figure this out. And I was like, well, I know Amy's smart, so I'll just hide behind her when we go into things. But I think you have to find that within yourself, that your ability to say, hey, I've got something to say. It's worth saying. And if you put it out there and you don't get any audience, you're not going to make any money from it. If nobody buys your stuff in your Etsy store, you're not going to make any money. If nobody comes to your flower shop, it's going to go under. But it's the ability to say, I have a talent and I'm here, because you've got to shout out that flower shop all over town. I mean, I'm all over Facebook. Like, are you listening to the funniest parenting podcast ever? Oh, by the way, it's mine. And it doesn't make me feel super comfortable to market myself, but nobody's going to believe in it more than Amy and I do.
Yeah, that is tough. The social media presence is a tough thing as well. You don't want to be, I don't know how to, I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to open the mid-level marketing type, like always on Instagram. Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to that saying that what I'm doing is valuable, and therefore I'm going to state that it is. And I'm not going to be ashamed about that, because I'm giving it my time and I'm saying it's worthy. And you're following me for a reason, especially if people are following you. It's like they're following you to follow you and what you're doing. So don't be afraid to say what you're doing.
Absolutely. And if 15 years in LA taught me anything, it was the hustlers over talenteds, I mean, people who are out there pushing are getting much more done than the true geniuses.
Yeah.
I also think don't spend too much time on like your family and close friends. Like, if they're into it, they're into it. And if they're not, they're not. And that's okay. I have a quote I wrote down, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was Melissa Febos said, like, the people that you're friends with who are not artists and who do not know you because of your art may or may not care about your art. And that doesn't mean it's not good. It doesn't mean they're not good. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't make it. If your sister-in-law isn't a big fan of your sweaters, it doesn't mean you should stop knitting them. And it doesn't mean you're not going to have a huge audience. But the people who are closest to you, sometimes they're not a good arbiter of whether what you have to give is worthwhile.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like that's a good stopping point for this conversation. Is there any final word of encouragement? And if not, where can listeners find you and connect with you online?
I mean, my final word of encouragement is just try, I think. And don't be shy. Don't be shy and try. Amy loves a rhyme, so I just came up with that one, Amy, just for you. Don't be shy, just try. And Amy, you can tell everyone where to find us, since I already came up with my genius rhyme.
Well, our podcast is called What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. We're What Fresh Hell Cast on Facebook and Twitter and Threads and Instagram and all the places, TikTok. We have a YouTube channel if you search What Fresh Hell Podcast. And our network of podcasts is called Atalyst Media, ADALYST, AtalystMedia.com. You can go to our website. We have 24 podcasts and growing that are all designed sort of for the female listener at different stages in her life. And it's really great content. And I'm really proud of all of it. Hey, can you be quiet? My 4-year-old just came in.
Perfect timing.
I know, right? Quickly, just to like rapid fire. Okay, there he goes. I'm almost done, Benji. 3 minutes. As we wrap things up here, I asked 2 questions to all my guests, and you both can answer or you each can take one. So the first one is, what's been a beneficial resource in your life that you want to share with the listeners? And you can have it be in association with what we've been talking about today, or it can just be something that's been helpful to you. And then my second question is, what is something you can't stop talking about?
All right, Amy, you better do beneficial resource. That's right up your alley.
Beneficial resource to me are exercise classes on the internet. I love corebarfit.com, and I love rhythm yoga, and I love Aloe Moves, MC Yogi. If anybody here does yoga, he has like a DJ in the classes. I love them. Those keep me going. They're a great resource, and they're not expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then Margaret, what can't you stop talking about?
Can it be super random?
Oh,
It has
yeah.
nothing to do with my entire life. It's just so random.
Yeah. What is it?
It's the TV show, The Traitors. My
Oh, yeah.
daughter and I was actually going to tell Amy about it off camera because we both have tween daughters. And there's a strike zone there that can be hard to hit with content because you don't really want to watch, like, I don't know, stuff that goes into too much like dating,
Yeah.
because it gets really awkward. But then they don't necessarily want to watch, I don't know, crime documentaries. It's hard to find that strike zone.
Yeah.
My daughter and I are binging the TV show The Traitors. It is a game show. I'm not a huge, I like The Bachelor and weird reality, but I'm not a huge reality TV person. It involves reality TV people who I don't know the names of. People kept recommending it. I was like, that's not the show for me. I don't watch that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
I am loving it. It is a game show that goes the whole season. 20 people come to a Scottish castle, and 2 of them are traitors who are trying to murder the other ones. I mean, it's a game. They slip a note under their door to murder them. It's not an actual murder. And then they're all trying to figure out who's the traitor and who's the good guys. And we're eating it up. We love to watch the show together. We get our lemon Italian ices every night and we watch The Traitors, and it is mother-daughter bonding time.
Wow.
Oh, I'll have to add that to what I'm watching. I usually don't watch a ton of TV. I am a podcast junkie, but I do watch Love is Blind whenever that show is on.
I mean, amazing. We could do a whole nother hour on this podcast about how everyone on Love is Blind is like, he's not attractive, he smells weird, and I don't like his personality, and he gets drunk too much. And then in their next interview, they're like, it's just love. I don't know what to tell you. I just love the guy. You're like, I don't think you know the meaning of that word.
Oh, yeah. It is just a
Amazing.
fascinating social experiment for sure. But I'll have to add Traitors. I know that the guy that was on The Bachelor, Pilot Pete, is on this season.
He is a traitor. I mean, he's not a traitor on the show. I'm not giving anything away. He's on Traitors. Correct.
Yes,
he's not. It's not a spoiler. He's not a
Did
traitor.
you spoil it? Okay.
I definitely did not. I promised, but he is on Traitors. And the first season is the race car driver from The Bachelor.
Oh, Ari. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. I don't watch The Bachelor anymore, but that'll be nostalgic for me. So,
good times.
Yes. Well, Amy and Margaret, thank you so much for joining me talking about intentionality in business today. Like I said, I learned a lot from you both. So I thank you for sharing it with my listeners as well.
Thank you for having us. Fun conversation.
It was a pleasure.
All right. Perfect.